Welcome back to Real Estate 101. Today we're going to continue our discussion on home renovations and home design, and I'm pleased to be joined once again by Daniel Ott of WhiteWillow Design. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Joe.
So Dan, today we're going to start and we're going to talk about taking out load-bearing walls. And my first question is, why do people, I guess I shouldn't say why do they, because every circumstance is different, but in your experience, why do most people want to take out load-bearing walls?
It usually revolves around a kitchen renovation. So they're trying to make a bigger kitchen, and the only way to do that is to take out some walls sometimes, and those usually end up being bearing walls.
Okay, so what are some of the concerns you face or run into when you're looking at a project like this?
People are always concerned about pricing. My concern comes in with what kind of services are in the walls, and then also with how are we going to support the structure of the building if that load-bearing wall isn't there.
Okay, now you touched on pricing. How does that work exactly when you're talking about a load-bearing wall?
So a lot of people, I come talk to them and they've already said, nah, we're not going to take a load-bearing wall out because it's going to be too expensive.
Right.
We've already talked to a few people and they've kind of given us some scary numbers. And my personal thought is that those scary numbers exist because the contractors I've talked to, maybe they're lower-end contractors or they're just handymen, they're not competent enough to be confident to take out this wall, so they price it high to start with. My thoughts are that with proper drawings and permits and the materials and the labor, you should be only talking $6,000 or $7,000 to take a wall out and put a beam in place. Now, it'll differ from project to project, and this only takes into effect the actual beam and the structure of it. All the finishings are going to be extra, so as long as this is part of a bigger project,
right,
a lot $6,000 or $7,000 for the actual structural of the beam.
Okay, so what kind of building services do you normally find in load-bearing walls when you're taking them down?
Absolutely everything. I've got a great example here. So recently I worked on a project and we were going to take out 2 bearing walls in a T, and it's about 30 feet of wall that we're taking out.
Right.
And that gives you about 25 spaces between all the studs. So the first space was empty, and then we had a return air, and then we had a return air trunk, and then we had a heat run, and then a plumbing pipe, drain pipe, and then we had central vac, and then we had a door opening that used to be there, and then we had another return air, and another return air,
Wow.
2 heat ducts, then we turn the corner, and we have a dryer vent, a return air again, another heat duct, and then the plumbing drain for the washing machine.
Wow.
So in all, we had about 3 empty joist spaces and 30 feet of wall. But then we come in and we make sure that with the people on site taking things out and moving all those services, that we can move them in such a way and put them in within other architectural details that we've already designed to make sure that moving these things is still possible and it doesn't impact the overall design.
Okay, so what about structural support when you're taking out a wall?
So the best example is when people don't put any support when the wall is gone.
Right.
We've been to houses
Which
before.
is a big no-no.
Yes. You go up to the second floor and you kind of,
Yeah.
the whole floor bounces a lot because they took a wall out and they didn't do anything to support it anymore.
Right.
Some of the things that we have to consider are when we have a load-bearing wall, the weight of the floor above is evenly distributed. Even if that's a roof, the weight of the roof and the ceiling is evenly distributed across that wall.
Right.
When we take the wall out and we replace it with something, probably a beam, that beam has to sit on posts. So as long as those posts directly line up on top of the basement posts, then we're still evenly distributing the same load. However, if we skip one of the basement posts and we span all the way over top of it, we're now doubling the load on the next post in the basement. Or maybe we go halfway and now we're missing a post. Well, we end up having to do a large concrete footing in the basement. More often than not, we're putting a larger concrete footing in the basement. This is one of the things that people don't consider when they're thinking about these projects.
So you touched on it, that there's got to be equal distribution of the weight in the home. That's how they're designed to begin with, right?
Yes.
The concrete slab goes in the basement, they put up their footings, they put up their posts, and then from there you start building your next levels, right?
Yes.
So you can't just take out a post. Okay, so let's say this. Can you take out a post and without replacing it with another post, maybe replace it with, I don't know, let's hypothetically say 4 2x10s?
You can, but the post pad, the concrete pad underneath that post at the end, is going to have to be much bigger than the old one was.
Because it was made for just the post.
Yeah.
All right, so when you're taking out a load-bearing wall, what beams do you recommend, or does it, I guess, is every project different?
Yes, every project's different, although I will more often recommend steel. Steel will span farther. Wood only goes so far. And
in terms of the weight load?
Yeah.
Okay.
So say you're only putting a 10-foot beam in, then you can get away with a couple 2x10s, 3, maybe 4 2x10s, something like that, depending on the load above, obviously.
Right.
But the farther you go, the more wood you need. You end up going with deeper wood, 2x12s. Maybe that doesn't even work, so we end up going with LVL wood, which ends up being even deeper. So you end up with 16-inch tall beams, which means that your headroom gets kind of low underneath them. Plus, they cost a lot. It's usually cheaper to go with steel. And then you can get away with maybe only an 8-inch beam, and maybe you can recess half of that in the ceiling. There's different ways to do it. And now you end up with only 4 or 5 inches sticking out below the ceiling level, and you have lots of headroom underneath, and it feels much more open. You take a wall out and you put a 16-inch beam in, it's still going to feel closed off from room to room.
All right, so this is going to be a 2-part question because I'm curious to know on both. So first off, what are the steps in removing a beam when you're taking out a load-bearing wall, and what are the steps when you're installing a beam? Because they can't be the same.
2-part question, but they have to be done at the same time. So when you're taking out a wall and you haven't put the beam in yet, you need to first temporarily support the structure above
before you pull out the wall.
So what ends up happening is you have a bearing wall in the middle. You end up about 2 feet away building a wall here, and then you 2 feet away on the other side building another wall. So that when you take this wall out, you have 2 walls.
Right.
They're just temporary. People don't nail them very well. They're just supposed to be up for a couple hours while you're putting the beam in. The only reason you go 2 feet away is so that you have about 4 feet between the two to work in later. Key aspect here is if you don't put the beam underneath where it's supposed to go before you build the temporary walls, you can't get the beam in later. So,
and just because of,
I speak from experience,
right? And I guess just because it's tight, and
yes,
it's hard.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you lay it in there between first, and then you build 2 walls around it, it's already there. You take the other wall down, then you start putting the beam up. But before putting that beam up, and before even building your temporary walls, you should have long ago dug that hole in the basement, had the inspection, poured the footing, and allowed the concrete to dry for a few days. Now you can put the beam up, and then you put your posts in between the beam and the footing in the basement. And now you can take your temporary walls down.
Okay, so you touched on both those walls, right? So you're going to put your beam down the middle. You have one wall on one side, one on the other. Can you just do the one wall?
It depends on the structure.
And the weight.
Yeah. So sometimes you can get away with, and even when you do a temporary wall, so when you build a permanent wall, you put studs at every 16 inches. You build a temporary wall, depending on what's up there, you can maybe put the studs at 3 feet because it's only supposed to support it temporarily. Over time, that load would start to compress and those studs would start to bend. But for a few hours, it's not going to go anywhere. The studs don't have to be straight. They can be a little bit crooked. So if you see your contractor doing something and it looks a little haphazard, it's okay.
All right. So are there any other structural items that can be used other than a beam?
Yes, but it depends again on what's above. So when people want to take load-bearing walls out, they automatically think, I'm going to put a beam in. But let's think about the typical split-level home, where your main level is your kitchen, living, dining room, and it's got a roof over top of it. Right? The other side's your bedrooms and your family room underneath and all that. But on this side, you only have the kitchen, living room, and there's a roof above it. But people are still thinking about trying to put beams and posts in and stuff. Well, let's get a little dramatic here and rip the entire roof off. Now we can put full span roof trusses in. And they span from front to back or side to side or whichever way it's working.
All right.
But now we don't need any beams in the middle. Because before the roof only spanned halfway, and they're sitting on top of that bearing wall.
Right.
But if we're now spanning from this side all the way to the other side, we don't need any beams or posts in the middle, and it ends up being quite cost effective. So material wise, you can buy a 20-foot steel beam for less than $1,000, but you can buy all the roof trusses for the whole roof at maybe $2,500. So it's not a whole lot more. So some of the things to consider though cost wise are, how old is the roof? Is it going to need to be replaced anyways, like
Right.
the shingles of it? Because if it is, then you might as well be putting it on new trusses instead of the old ones.
No, because you're going to do the job anyway.
If you did the roof last year, well, now you're going to have to redo the roof again.
Yeah.
Although there is a way, we've done it before, where we keep the original roof intact and we get 2-part trusses. Without taking the roof off, we go from inside and we put the one truss up one way and the other side up one way. And then there's an engineering detail on how to connect the two. And we've now resupported the old roof with a new roof built on the inside without affecting the shingles, soffit, fascia, eavesdrop.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Little more involved.
Right.
But one of the things you can do when you do a truss is we can now do vaulted ceilings.
So this is
instead of-
something you've come up with.
Yeah, other people have done it, but I mean, most lay people or clients that have come to have not even considered this. So we're
Right.
actually doing one in Brampton right now where I came across that idea just having coffee with someone one day, and they're like, "Wow, that's pretty cool." And a year later, they're like, "We want to do that to our house now." So we're at permit stage now, but yeah, we're taking the whole roof off and we're putting vaulted ceiling in. So now instead of 8-foot ceilings in the middle, we have 11-foot ceilings. So volume wise, so when you open up a room, it seems a lot bigger because walls don't just take up 4.5 inches. I say walls take up about 3 feet because you have to have walking room beside them on each side
On each
as well.
side. Right.
So when you get rid of the wall, you also have like 3 feet all the way down the middle of your house of more room. Well, visually, it also seems much bigger. But when you take your ceiling and you raise it 3 feet, now visually you have one massive
It looks bigger.
level.
Oh,
Yeah, it's huge. And I think resale wise, one of the big differences in more expensive homes is what they've done with their ceilings.
high ceilings.
So if we do high ceilings, you've now also increased the
Resale
resale
value.
value
Yeah.
of your home.
And you touched on permits. I was actually gonna bring that up. So in a project like this, you've got to pull permits.
Absolutely. So the general rule of thumb for a permit is if you're doing something structural, you should pull out a permit. This is definitely structural. We're taking out the middle bearing wall of a home.
All right.
On top of that, you're moving, like we said, probably some building services. In that example, we're moving a lot of building services. That would all be covered under the permit as well. Some people try to hide it when they're doing the beam and thing from the inside and just say they're doing an interior renovation. But if you're pulling the roof off, you can't hide that.
All right.
Anyone driving by is going to
Could
see,
see
hey,
it.
there's no roof on that house.
Of course. And I guess to continue on the permits, so when you pull the permit, how many times does the inspector come by to check the work?
With something like this, it would be just as many times as if you were building a whole house, really, because you've got foundation, even though it's a little piece of foundation.
Right.
You've got structural because you're putting the beam in. You may be involved in some insulation, and then you got your finishes that go around all that stuff later. So it 4 or 5 times.
All right, Dan. So for anybody watching or listening who's about to embark on a project like this where they want to remove a load bearing wall, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can email me. They can go to my website, whitewillowdesign.ca. They can call me, 905-220-9419. I'd be happy to talk to anybody.
All right, Dan, great stuff. Thanks for coming on today's show. It was a really fascinating topic.
Thanks, Joe.
So there you have it. If you're looking for help on your next home renovation project, get in contact with Daniel Ott of WhiteWillow Design. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, comment, and share our videos. I'm Joe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.